we are creating a new sewing project, totally inspired by TikTok. And I'm so excited about it, and you are going to be excited about it too. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who are new around here, my name is Madison. I'm a fashion design educator, seamstress, thrifter, and lover of all things style and fashion, which is what I share all about here on YouTube and my various social medias. I'm excited that you're here to watch today's video, so let's dive in. So I saw this dress on TikTok from Cara, who runs the account Small Museum both on TikTok and Instagram, and she does a lot of fun thrift flip, repurpose projects. She has an adorable jumpsuit pattern that just came out that I need to make, and this dress is very similar to that, but she doesn't have a pattern out for it. But she made a video about this yellow bandana dress, and I fell in love with it. It was so cute. So we're gonna make it. I'm gonna show you how you can create your own if you're interested in that. So 2 years ago, I made a dress completely out of all these different colors of bandanas, inspired by, I think, the brand Psychedelic Cowboy or something. Made a video, posted on YouTube. A lot of people loved it. A lot of people made their own versions of it. A lot of other sewers at the time made their own versions of it, and is one of my favorite projects. Easy breezy DIY beginner sewing projects I have done. And it's 2023, 2 years later, and we're making a new version of it, but this time it's inspired by TikTok. This is the original dress. It's super cute. Again, it's all one color bandanas, differing from the first dress I made like this that was all different colors of bandanas. So I ordered a pack of pink bandanas off of Amazon. I figured I need more pink in my life and in my wardrobe, so we're gonna make it, and it's gonna be quick and easy, hopefully. So follow along, grab your bandanas. I put the details in the description, and let's get sewing. For this project, you are going to need a total of 14 square bandanas. Once you have those, you are going to group them together in groups of 3. The reason for this is that we're going to sew 3 bandanas together long ways, and we're going to create 2 rows of those that are then going to be sewn together for the skirt. So essentially the front skirt is going to be made out of 6 square bandanas. The back skirt is going to be made out of 6 square bandanas, all sewn together, kind of like a quilt. And then the bodice is going to be made out of 2 square bandanas that are going to be folded in half to make a long rectangle. Next up, we're going to take some measurements. Because this dress doesn't really have a pattern, we're just dealing with rectangles and squares, all we need is measurements. So I'm going to take my full bust measurements, and I'm also going to take just the front part of my bust from each side seam of my tank top. That measurement, which for me was 17.5 across the front of my bust, is going to become the width of my bodice. And then I'm going to add about 1/2 inch seam allowance. So based on your measurements, you're going to do the same thing. Just take the front measurement of your bust. You're going to do the same width for the back, and then add seam allowance. Then for the length of the bodice, basically where it hits at the top and the bottom of your bust, you're going to just take that measurement. It's going to be different for everyone. For me, it was about 6.5. So that's what the top to the bottom of my bodice is going to be, essentially where it's going to hit under my bust. I also added 1/2 inch seam allowance there as well. Because I used the same measurements for the front and the back of my bodice, I just used one bodice that was already cut out to cut out the other one out of the second bandana, just laying it on top. And then the leftover fabric from those bodice pieces, I cut into strips, and I'm going to use those to make my straps later on. I cut my straps about 1.5 inches wide so that once I sew them together, they're going to be about 1/2 inch. You can adjust that for your preference. After our straps are cut out, we are now going to start constructing our bodice. We're going to open those folded rectangles up so that they are a wider, fatter rectangle, and then we're just going to pin them right sides together and sew down one of the sides. We're going to set the bodice aside, and now we're going to start pinning all of our squares together. So again, we want to focus on right sides together. My bandanas had this really helpful 100% cotton mark in the right hand corner, which told me what the right side was. So I just made sure to match those up on all of my squares, and I'm going to pin 3 squares together so that when I go over to my sewing machine, they're already pinned and I can just sew them together. We're going to do this for every panel for the skirt, and there's 2 rows for the front of the skirt and 2 rows for the back. So essentially we're going to do this a total of 4 times, pinning 3 squares of bandanas together and sewing them, and then continuing that for the next row. Now that our sewing machine is started and ready to go, we are going to start off by sewing that side seam of our bodice. We're going to sew this with a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and we're just sewing one side seam. We're going to set it aside for now, and then we're going to take up all of those square bandana pieces that we pinned together and sew them all together using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. So again, after they are sewn together, you're going to have 3 squares of bandanas that are all connected, and you're going to repeat that 3 additional times so that you have 4 long pieces of 3 bandanas that are sewn together. You're going to press those seams open and also iron your bandanas to get out all of those wrinkles before we sew the 3 bandanas to another set of 3 bandanas. While we're at the ironing board, we're also going to press open that side seam of our bodice, and then we're going to fold it over so that it's doubled up. Now that we have our 4 sets of 3 bandanas sewn together, as you can see in this clip, we are going to take a second set of 3 bandanas that are sewn together, and we are going to pin them together along the middle. So we want to make sure that we are matching them up right sides together, face to face. And we're gonna also make sure to match up those seams. So we're going to pin those first, and then we're just going to pin along the long stretch. We're going to do this for the front and for the back. Once we have those 2 sets of 3 bandanas pinned together, we're going to take it back over to our sewing machine and sew a 5/8 inch long straight stitch. This is going to allow us to have a front part of our skirt and a back part of our skirt. You're going to repeat that same step for your other set of bandanas. You're going to take it back over to the ironing board and press that seam open and flat. The nice thing about using all of these bandanas is that all of the edges are already finished, so you actually don't have to do any seam finishes on this dress, which makes it such a quick project. And as you can see, we now have 6 bandanas all sewn together. It kind of looks like a quilt. So we have 2 sets of these, one for the front and one for the back. And now to actually start constructing it into a skirt, we need to gather the top part of that. I'm a sucker for pockets in all of my dresses, so I decided to cut out some quick pockets out of an extra bandana that I had, and I'm going to pin these along the sides of my skirt panels. I decided to pin these 10 inches down since the dress is a higher waist. If I were you, I'd probably do it more at like 8 or 9 inches so that they're a little bit higher, but we have to pin these pockets into place before we sew the side seams. So again, just taking one of those pocket pieces, pinning it 10 inches down from the top along the side edge of our skirt. And we're going to do this to the front and the back. So 4 pockets, 1 piece sewn to each side. We're going to take our skirt pieces over to our sewing machine and sew those pockets into place. We're just sewing the side of the pocket that we pinned, nothing else right now. While I'm at my sewing machine, I decided to grab my straps, fold them in half, and sew them right at the edge of my presser foot, a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, so that I can flip them right side out and have those ready to attach to my bodice later on. An easy trick for flipping any kind of tubes of fabric right side out after they're sewn is just to take a safety pin, pin it into one edge, and then use that safety pin to feed it through the tube, kind of like you're feeding elastic through a waistband, but you're just feeding the fabric back through, and then it will flip right side out and be all nice and pretty. You can iron it. This is great for straps or any kind of bows, flipping anything that's skinny right side out. So that's what I'm doing here. Now it's time to sew the sides of our skirt together. So we're going to take the front of our skirt and pin it to the back of our skirt, down and along the sides. And because we have pockets, the magic way to sew our pockets is to start pinning down from the top part of our skirt. We pin around our pocket and then we keep going down. So it's not a straight seam all the way down the side edge of our skirt. We're going to sew down to the pocket, around the pocket, and continue sewing down. And this is how we are able to have the magic of pockets and also sew the sides of our skirt together at the same time. And as always, we're going to repeat this step for the other side seam of our skirt. Pin down, around our pocket, and back down, and you're going to sew along the path of those pins. Because my pockets were raw edges, I took them over to my serger and serged the edges so that they wouldn't fray. If you don't have a serger, you can just use a zigzag stitch along the edge of your pockets, or you can use pinking shears and trim the edges as well. After we sew those side seams and around our pockets, as always, we're going to press our seams open. The next step for the skirt is to gather it, which means that we need to reset the stitch on our sewing machine to a basting stitch, which is going to be the highest stitch length on my sewing machine. It's 5.0. I just decided to put in one seam of a basting stitch. Usually I do two, but I wanted to save time. So that's what we're doing here. Again, remember, when you do a basting stitch, you do not want to backstitch, and you want to leave long tails so that you can pull that thread and gather your skirt together. This is what's going to create our waist. Once our skirt starts to be gathered, we are going to sandwich those gathers in between the two layers of our bodice. Now, I forgot to show it in a video here, but the edge of our bodice I've folded in and ironed 1/2 inch under so that there aren't any raw edges. So those edges are folded in and underneath the bodice, and those two layers are going to sandwich over our gathers. We're going to pin them into place and sew them down. Make sure that you match up the side seam of your skirt with that side seam of our bodice that we sewed, so that your gathers are evenly placed across the front and the back. And because your bandanas are also squares, you also want to make sure that the gathers are fairly even so that the print is centered. When I'm attaching a skirt to a bodice of a dress with a gathered waistline, I usually work in sections. So for this dress, I focused on the gathers for the front of the bodice, making sure they were all evenly spaced. The side seam was pinned to the side seam of the bodice, and then I went and did the same thing to the back. And this is what it looks like all pinned together. The gathers sandwiched in between the two layers of a bodice, and then we're going to sew right along the edge where those pins are. This is what the skirt looks like once it's attached to the top of our bodice. Now we're going to baste that open side seam together so that we can sew our zipper in. So again, right sides together. This is the other side seam of our bodice. We pin it. We're going to sew it with 5/8 inch seam allowance, and we're going to sew this on a basting stitch so that we can take it out after we pin in our zipper. Here we are pinning in the zipper. I just press those side seams open, and then the teeth of the zipper are going to be perfectly placed along that seam, and then I just pin my zipper on, and then we're going to sew it with the zipper foot down and around. If you want to know more about how to sew a zipper, YouTube has a ton of videos, and then work through that before you do this process if you've never done it before. When I'm sewing my zippers on, usually I don't sew the top of my zippers originally. I wait till the end so that I can unzip it a little bit and get a closer stitch. So that's just what I'm doing here, is re-sewing the tops of my zippers, and then I fold that little tail that's sticking out of the zipper in and then stitch it back down. Since we did a basting stitch, we're going to just seam rip that open, and now our zipper is accessible and working. Next, we're going to attach our straps. Strap placements are going to be different on everyone. For me, my straps are about 14 inches long from front to back, and then I pinned them about 3.5 inches in from my side seams on the front and about 4 to 5 inches in from the side seams on my back. This is where I usually put my dress on, pin my straps, figure out the placement, and then sew them on my sewing machine. For this, I'm going to sew right along the top edge of my bodice to attach my strap, but I know it's going to need a little bit of an extra stitch and reinforcement, so I'm going to put a little tiny stitch right underneath that, barely noticeable, but this will keep my straps from busting or breaking or ripping or something like that. And that is it. Sewing on the straps is the last step in this process. So here is the final dress. And that is it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you try out this dress for yourself. It is a great, easy, and fun dress to make, and if you do, make sure to tag me so that I can see all of your creations. Stay tuned for the next video, and I will see you next time.